Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, the CEEMAN and Emerald Publishing Case Writing webinar. My name is Sarah Anderson and I'm the Cases Marketing Manager at Emerald Publishing. In our session today, we'll be talking about what makes the best case study and how you can make yours stand out amongst the crowd. And we'll also be sharing details with you on how you can be in with a chance of winning the Emerald and CEEMAN competition. I just want to start with some housekeeping items. The webinar is going to be recorded and we'll send it to the email that you registered with following the session. And please feel free to share this with your colleagues. The session should last around 1 hour. If you want to ask questions as we're going, please feel free to put them in the question panel on the right-hand side of your screen. And we will have time at the end to answer questions. And just quickly before we begin, if you want to, can I ask you to pop in the chat box where you're joining us from today, and it's just nice to see where in the world everyone is. And our panelists today are based in Slovenia, the USA and the UK. And on that, it gives me a pleasure to introduce our guest speakers for today. First we have Tjaša Cankar, Project Manager at CEEMAN, the International Association for Management Development in Dynamic Societies, which unites over 200 members from 50 countries all over the world. And this includes universities and business schools, professional associations, companies and individuals. We also welcome Dr. Michael Goldman, who teaches on the University of San Francisco's Sport Management Master's Program. Michael also holds a faculty role with the Gordon Institute of Business Science in Johannesburg and is Editor-in-Chief of Emerald Publishing's Emerging Markets Case Studies collection. And finally, from Emerald Publishing, we have James Hobbs, our Cases Publishing Lead, who will talk to you a little bit more about the competition and how you can enter. I'm now going to hand over to Tjaša, who will tell you about CEEMAN and the partnership with Emerald Publishing.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Warm welcome to everyone joining us today. So my name is Tjaša Cankar and I'm a project manager at CEEMAN, and maybe I could start with just a few sentences about what CEEMAN is and how we are connected to the case writing. So CEEMAN was established 30 years ago as a management development association focusing mostly on Central and Eastern Europe. And this is also where the first 3 letters of our name come from. So CEE stands for Central and Eastern Europe. We are located in Slovenia and our headquarters, so to say, is in beautiful Bled, overseeing the lake, which you can also see here on this wonderful picture. And over the years, we grew, we developed, and we are now a global association, as Sarah already mentioned, with over 200 members from 50 countries. And most of our members are universities and business schools, but also individuals and companies. And we also have exchange partnerships with other associations. What do we do? So we mostly focus on the faculty development. We organize educational programs for deans, for faculty, for staff. We organize international conferences, events, and also hold regular free online webinars on different topics. We also have our own accreditation. We accredit business schools, and our accreditation is called CEEMAN Equa, which you have probably already heard of. We also do joint research projects, publications, and very important, we also do competitions and awards. Sarah, please, let's go to the next slide. The reason why we are here today is to learn and to get familiar with the case writing competition. And this is actually one of our longest running activities. It started in 1996. And we're very happy to say that since 2007, we are running it together with Emerald Publishing as our partner. The aim of this competition is to promote the creation and active use of local cases, focusing mostly on emerging markets. We believe that it is very important for every part of the world to have the local cases focusing on the local context. And this is also very important for the emerging markets. And here we want to make an impact. And that is the reason why we have launched this competition years ago. The competition has monetary and non-monetary prizes. There are also publication opportunities with emeralds, which is also a great way to make your work visible. And since I believe that James will later on tell you more about the competition timeline and deadlines, I will not go there. So I would like to present a bit more the non-monetary prizes that are offered by CEEMAN. On the next slide, please. So the first thing is the CEEMAN annual conference. We organize the conference every year, and each year it is located in a different country. And I have to say that the upcoming one is very special for us because we will be celebrating 30 years of CEEMAN. And for that reason, we are also bringing this event back home to Slovenia, to beautiful Bled. Everyone welcome. The conference will be held from 21st to 23rd September. And the winners of the case writing competition will also be invited to join us at this conference to receive the award in person. And the second thing that I want to mention is the scholarship for our flagship faculty development program called IMTA. IMTA stands for International Management Teachers Academy. I have to say that for this program, my colleagues tell me that we get great feedbacks every year, and it has also earned one of the top spots among the best faculty development programs around the world. We launched it in year 2000, and since then we have educated people from more than 50 countries around the world. The International Management Teachers Academy focuses mostly on improving teaching skills, the materials and methods, and what is actually really important is that it focuses on teaching with cases. So we organize this academy every year, and it usually takes place in June, which is already also the case for the upcoming one, which will be held from the 14th to 23rd June, also in Bled in Slovenia. And the winners of the competition will receive scholarship for this program. And the first place gets a full scholarship, while the second and third place receive partial scholarships. So on my last slide, Sarah, please, you can see my email. So feel free to contact me with any questions about the competition, about International Management Teachers Academy annual conference, or any other CEEMAN activity that you would like to learn more about. This is all from me. Thank you so much for your attention. And now I would like to hand over to Michael.
Well, thank you, Chasa. It's wonderful to partner with CEEMAN again. Thank you for those comments. And it's wonderful to see Lake Bled and to hear that we'll have the opportunity to spend some time there near the island on the lake later this year. It certainly is a wonderful part of the world. And I know everyone is looking forward to gathering there in a few months' time. We value the partnership with CEEMAN so much because case writing, case research, case teaching, we know now after research after research after research is such an effective tool to facilitate learning. And what I love about your International Management Academy and the program to work with faculty is it's really focused on how we facilitate learning. And if I think about how most PhDs, how most doctoral students become scholars, become academics, become teachers, is they focus on the content. They focus on their discipline. They focus on what they study. And unfortunately, far too few and far too little of academic education is focused on teaching, is focused on the facilitation of learning. But if you think about what most academics do every day is teach. And so it's a really important critical component. So what I'd love to spend a little bit of time on here to pick up on Tiasa's comments is talk a little bit about how we see cases, discussion-based case studies, as a publication form, obviously being published through Emerald Publishing's emerging market case studies, but more broadly in terms of this competition, an opportunity to make a substantial contribution to the development of managers and leaders around the world, especially in emerging markets. So as you'll see on the next slide, we really talk a lot about this idea of real impact. And Emerald and AACSB and other international organizations have over the last decade really lent into this idea that what scholars and academics do could perhaps be more impactful than just getting a publication output, getting a hit, putting something in a journal. And so if you consider the work of real impact and how our work as scholars and academics can have some kind of broader impact in society, in organizations, with communities, it puts an additional responsibility on us and an additional opportunity to do much more interesting work. So you're seeing international organizations move in this direction. On the next slide, you'll see other networks such as the Responsible Business Network here coming together around the world, academics coming together and recognizing that the work we do can do so much more than just be an academic publication, that the value to stakeholders, the impact on society can be really important. We've also heard a number of the leaders in our academic space talk about their own careers and kind of open the curtain a little bit, draw back the curtain of how this works. On the next slide, you'll see some comments from Clayton Christensen before he passed away. He was interviewed in the MIT Sloan here, and there's a quotation that I will pause for a moment and let you read. So what you see Clayton Christensen talking to here is a recognition that in his work, as with many others, the opportunity to engage qualitatively with not just respondents, but with decision makers in organizations. And if we as business professionals and business academics are focused on the competitiveness and effectiveness of organizations, many of us around the world are working in business schools or management programs, and we're educating the next generation of business leaders. How do we understand the complex decision-making and issues facing those managers, facing those leaders in an organization? Clayton Christensen here reflecting in his own work around innovation, and as you may recall, disruptive innovation and all the work he did back in the 80s and 90s, that the time he spent with executives, talking across the table, understanding more deeply and qualitatively how they made those decisions was critical to the way he created the models and frameworks and theories that now we teach in the textbooks and talk about. So as researchers, as scholars, the opportunity here is to get out of our offices, to get off our laptops, and to go and spend time in these organizations that we teach about, in these organizations that we are preparing people to lead in. In the next slide, you'll see a recent editorial from Greg Fisher at Indiana, who is the editor of Business Horizons. And as he was talking about Business Horizons as a publication and the kind of work that he and his colleagues are doing, this argument to be relevant to business, to be writing not just for each other as academics, but to be writing for business, to be conducting good scholarly work that has an impact not just on academia, but on practice. And so Greg's making a really strong argument here that you can take a look at in his recent editorial for the importance to have multiple stakeholders in mind. The next two slides as well will talk to this point, an editorial from the American Marketing Association, where Christina Moorman and others have argued quite forcefully in the marketing space specifically the need to connect theory and practice, the need to do, as you can see there on the right-hand side, case studies that allow us to more deeply understand those choices we're making around brands, around segmentation, around communication. If we don't get deeply inside and understand the dynamics, we're essentially talking at a too superficial level. And then lastly, the example here on the next slide is Michael Porter. And when he came through to give a presentation to the North American Case Research Association some years ago, this was his quotation that he left us with. And so similar to Clayton Christensen, you're seeing here the leaders in scholarship drawing the curtain back and giving us a sense of the nitty-gritty of the process. And the process, yes, is some statistical modeling and some quantitative work and samples and generalizing, and that's really important. But they're reflecting here on this other piece of their work and this real important formative piece in understanding concepts and phenomena and understanding the dynamics of how things work. So that's really where case research fits in. And what we're really excited about as Emerald and partnering with CEEMAN and thinking about this competition, really excited about the opportunity to tell emerging market stories, to understand not just how our friends at Amazon and Apple and Starbucks manage the complexity and navigate the messiness of the world right now, but how do businesses in emerging markets do that? How do our friends in Mumbai or in Lagos or in Jakarta, how do they navigate some of those complexity? How do multinationals as well as locally grown businesses, family businesses in many of the most interesting markets in the world, how do they think about decision making? How do they apply judgment in complexity? And so as you'll see in the next slide, when we think about discussion-based cases, we're really talking about good research that is rigorous and involves building a case study database of multiple sources of evidence, where we're going out there and we're talking to multiple interviewees and multiple stakeholders in an organization, understanding how all those pieces fit together and digging deeper, in order to do some really good case research that we can then express in a number of ways. Our focus today and our focus for this competition are discussion-based cases that you'll see on the right-hand side of the slide. And so publications like EMCS, Emerging Market Case Studies, publish quality discussion-based cases based on good quality research with multiple sources of evidence, primary and secondary evidence pooled together in a very compelling narrative in order to tell a powerful story that facilitates learning. That's our focus with discussion-based cases. Of course, as we know, good quality case research can also be expressed in other ways, such as an article case published in other formats and other publications. But our focus for the competition is on the right-hand side, discussion-based cases. An important component there is to focus on the discussion of a decision. Cases are powerful when students from undergrad through to executive are placed in the shoes of the decision maker and have to consider how she, as the decision maker, needs to weigh up multiple different variables and issues at the same time in order to make a decision that is not simple, a decision that is more strategic, a decision that has more trade-offs and implications and consequences and is messy, because that's real life. And we want to prepare our students, our managers, our executives to be able to thrive in that environment. So decisions in cases are really important. We also use the phrase dilemmas. So a decision case, a dilemma case, these are cases where they're built around one or a set of really important, vexing questions or challenges being faced by a decision maker or team of decision makers. That's a critical piece to build a quality competition-winning case around. What's the decision? I'm emphasizing this point because I find that for many of us, when we start thinking about writing cases, we focus on really interesting stories of what organizations have done. And so naturally, as we start writing and as we start interviewing and we start pulling that case together, we focus descriptively on telling the story. And that is a part of the case. It's important to tell the story. It's important to provide the context. We have 7 to 8 to 9 pages in order to develop a quality case study. We're going to have some description. But if we only have description, then what is the problem that students have to solve? How can they put themselves in the decision maker's shoes and have to weigh up different evidence in order to make a recommendation? So we find that some competition entries over the last few years don't go far enough. They tell a story, they're descriptive in nature, but there's no so what. There's no key choice or dilemma or decision that the case is built around. And what we then find, and you'll know as a case teacher, those cases don't do as well in the classroom. Students are less engaged. Students have less skin in the game where they're trying to come up with an innovative or smart solution, because it's just a story about what happened at a certain time. So this idea of the decision and the dilemma is a critical component. And if I separate out those award-winning cases from previous CEEMAN competitions versus those that were interesting cases that may get published with a bunch of tweaks, it's really around the decision and the dilemma. So that's an important golden thread, red thread, key thread throughout the case. So that's an important consideration to focus on. In the next few slides, I want to talk a little bit about style and structure and how we put this together. So on the next slide, you'll see an example of some of the traditional scholarship that we might do as we write articles for publication. On the left-hand side, a terribly boring article that I wrote some years ago there about being distinctive when you belong and optimal distinctiveness theory, and now we've all fallen asleep. Typical scholarship, right, that we do when we deep dive into a theory. And I joke about sleeping. It's really important and interesting. But if you look at the style of how we write, when we write for each other, when we write for the academy, when we write typical articles published in these research-focused article publications, it has a certain style and genre. And that's how many of us get educated to write in our doctoral programs. On the right-hand side, you'll see much more of the narrative style that is a critical component of writing a quality award-winning case study. Here's an example of a case I've previously been involved in that is one of the example cases that is freely available on the EMCS website for authors to take a look at and to kind of unpack and work out how we did what we did. But in this case about Bright Rock, a South African and I think Australian as well, life insurance business, you'll see that it's a different style. It's almost journalistic in tone, right? You have a protagonist, you have a set of characters at a point in time. Think about your most exciting James Bond movie. Think about, Braveheart. Think about the movies that come to mind where it's on a knife's edge and there's a dramatic telling of a story, and you are put in the decision makers or the protagonist's shoes at that point in time. That's the narrative style that we are using when we develop the case study. So I wrote both. And part of what we need to do as academics is wear these different hats and use these different styles. And so if I was writing a poem versus writing an academic article versus writing a rock concert song, right, or set of lyrics, I would be using a different style. And so a strong encouragement here to authors looking to submit for this competition is make sure that your style is appropriate. The writing style is a narrative style. We're trying to engage the audience. We're still professional. It's still written, with really good language, great grammar, but the narrative style is not academic in the traditional sense of writing for the academy. right? We're writing for practitioners, we're writing for students, especially in the case. Now, the teaching note, as you'll see in the next slide, the teaching note is a really important additional document that comes as a set, right? You've got the case study that might be about 8 pages in length, and we know that our students are struggling to read more than a few hundred, characters in a scroll on Instagram or TikTok or wherever. And so cases are getting shorter over time. For this competition, we find that cases around 7 or 8 pages typically do really well. And those are the cases that are typically adopted by many of the teachers and instructors around the world. So that's the case study document. It's got a narrative style. It's signed off by the organization. If there's primary data, it tells a story, but it's built around a dilemma. The teaching note is written for instructors, we write it for each other, right? We don't write it for the students. The student never sees the teaching note, otherwise known as an instructor manual. And what's inside the teaching note is really, really important. And this is the second point I want to make today about what separates average cases from award-winning cases. The first point I made was around the decision and the dilemma. The second is about the quality of the teaching note. We find that some of our colleagues around the world are able to write quite compelling case studies. They get the narrative style right, they build in a good dilemma, it's interesting, it's got a good amount of information, primary, secondary, it's a great case study. But then they kind of forget about the teaching note. And it's a very average teaching note. So what I want to focus on in the next 5 minutes is how do we develop a great teaching note? Because if I think about the judges for this competition, I know that for them, the teaching note is one of the most important considerations. So I think it's a few slides ahead. And we'll kind of focus in on the teaching note here. I'm going to skip this one. And yeah, so let's hang here for a second. One back, Sarah, thank you. In terms of gathering data, it's really important, as we said, that we're building a case study database of multiple sources. And some of the award-winning cases we've seen in the last few years have been developed from multiple sources of data. Let me make a quick point here about primary versus secondary. A case does not have to have primary data to be an excellent award-winning case. You can build an excellent case based on secondary source data, but the quality of the secondary sources is really important. And the extent of secondary sources is really important. And here I want to encourage you to leverage the resources of your institution's libraries. We have access to such great databases, not just of academic articles, but of industry, market, business, company kind of databases, where we're able to pull really good information about an industry, about a marketplace, about consumers and segments and competitors from these databases. And so Mergent Online and Nexus and Passport and some of these databases you may recognize, these are from my library. You might have them named slightly differently in your library, but we have access to some really good non-academic but proprietary password protected databases. And so being friends with your librarian and being able to access these kind of resources is a great way of building a quality case. The other quick point around secondary source cases is developing the protagonist. The character in the case can be a bit harder because you're not talking to the person. And so if you're not able to gather that primary data, you have to work much harder to go and find other secondary sources where the voice of the protagonist comes through. So has that executive given TV interviews, radio interviews, press interviews, podcasts? Do they have a YouTube channel? Are there recordings of their advisory meetings or their board meetings or share price announcements or mergers and acquisitions announcements? The voice of the protagonist needs to come through. In a number of markets around the world, we have fairly good regulators who have parliamentary hearings and regulatory committees where companies have to come and talk about what they're doing or report on the good and not so good things that they're doing. That is also excellent secondary source data where the voice of the protagonist, great quotations from the decision maker, can be taken as secondary source data and integrated into the case. So the argument that a secondary source case has no quotations from the protagonist, does not have the voice of the protagonist, that is not true. We have to work harder to get it, but that's often what separates a very average secondary source case from an award-winning CEEMAN competition secondary case. I'm going to focus a little bit more now in the next slide on, actually it's the one after, thank you Sarah, the next one, on the teaching notes. Let me spend a couple of minutes here on how to build a great teaching note that's going to win this competition. These are the sections that we typically see in a great teaching note, and we really need to focus on each one of those. The synopsis is a really good summary of the case and the learning aspects in the case. Remember, the synopsis is published typically with the case, and so you don't want to put the answer of the dilemma, you don't want to put the secret information of the teaching note in the synopsis, because that's going to be online in the EMCS and Emerald Insight database, etc. Everything else is not available except to instructors. So here's where we can really talk about unpacking the case. Learning objectives are critical. The learning outcomes structure how instructors can go and use the case in order to facilitate learning. Bloom's taxonomy you'll know well, and there are a number of other scholars who have really helped us think about how adults learn, how young people learn. And so pedagogy and andragogy and good college level higher education learning theory needs to be built into our learning objectives. Don't just say 5 learning objectives where every one of them is, at the end of this case, students will understand this. Students will understand that. That's not good enough, right? Understanding is just one level, and a fairly basic level within something like Bloom's revised taxonomy. So we need to spend a few minutes understanding how people learn and using taxonomies and frameworks like that to pitch our case at the appropriate level. If the target audience is executives, then we should be focusing on learning outcomes that are relevant to executives. If the target audience of our case is undergraduate business students in marketing, then we should be developing learning objectives that make sense for that audience, right? Not just content, but skill-based outcomes. Yeah, it's not just that students will know something. Knowledge is important, but capabilities are more important. So let's focus on skills. Let's focus on, at the end of this case, successful students will be able to do what? Will they be able to interpret? Will they be able to analyze? Will they be able to critique? Will they be able to assess or evaluate? Will they be able to propose? Will they be able to create and develop? These are the verbs, right, that we need to build into great quality learning objectives. So that's an important piece, and we see the difference there between average cases and great cases. Obviously, there's a quick research method section, a little paragraph that talks about how the case was developed and the kind of data that was used. The teaching plan is an important component of the teaching note and lays out one way in which the case can be taught. Not the only way, but the most appropriate teaching plan for the learning objectives. And it's more than just a table with some headings and the amount of time. So an introduction, 5 minutes. Question 1, 15 minutes. Question 2, 13 minutes. That's not enough of a teaching plan. That kind of time guideline is useful, but we need to dig deeper. We need to talk about what are the role plays that might happen in the room. What is the group work that can happen before, during, and after the case session? What are the questions we can use? Not assignment questions, but discussion questions, trigger questions, follow-on questions, debate questions that we can use to facilitate a great quality case discussion. Remember that when we teach cases in the room, we don't use a bunch of slides and download content. When we teach a case in a room, we facilitate learning by facilitating a rigorous analysis of the case, where the content is being surfaced and emerging in the conversation, where what the students say generates the theory and the frameworks that we want to teach. Our job as facilitators is to ask great questions, to challenge and probe, move the conversation in different directions so that what emerges can become the learning points from the case. That's hard. That's a craft. As case teachers, we know it takes a while for us to develop that and some good experience. In the teaching note, we are codifying a plan for how an instructor can do that. And so the more detailed you are in your teaching plan, the more helpful it'll be to other instructors. You want someone to be able to pick up your case on Sunday night, spend an hour or two preparing your case, follow your teaching plan closely with their own style, and be able to teach an effective case class on the Monday morning. So the teaching plan is really important. My last quick comments here on the teaching note as I wrap up is the model answers to the assignment questions. So you're going to have a set of assignment questions that are based off the learning objectives. Those model answers are really important. That's where we demonstrate our scholarship. That's where we use some of those academic references and we write for each other and we develop half a page, page and a half of quality, rigorous model answers. What would an A student answer for that question? What would a B student answer for that question? And we integrate and apply theory to demonstrate how that theory comes alive in the answers. So those are some of the points that are really important to emphasize in the case and in the teaching note, and it really separates out average cases from amazing cases. I hope what I've been able to do today is just give you a highlight of some of the important considerations. On our website, as you can see, the Learning Hub and additional resources on how to look at this, how to develop great cases. We've got a number of cases available that you can take a look at. Obviously, if your library subscribes to Emerald Insight, you have access to all the cases. And if you're a registered instructor, you have access to all the teaching notes. And really, I encourage you as you prepare for this competition to look at award-winning cases, go and look at those cases that have won over the last few years and work out how they did what they did. That's how I learned how to write cases, and I hope that you're able to do that over the next few weeks as you submit for this competition. So Sarah, we can jump through to the end here. I hope those comments were useful for everyone thinking about submitting in the next few days and weeks.
Thank you, Michael, for that presentation. Very, very useful to hear. I'm going to speak a bit just about the Emerald elements to the competition of how to submit overall. So firstly, I'm James Hobbs and I'm the commissioning lead for cases here at Emerald. I started at Emerald in November 2021, so I'm still fairly new to the role. Nevertheless, I'm happy to field any questions that you may have throughout this presentation. There's a section at the end where you can note down my email or pose any questions to us after I've finished. So firstly, the following slides do contain a number of links to Emerald web pages for submitting and preparing your case. Do not worry about noting them all down, as we'll make sure that you are supplied with them at the end of this webinar. Firstly, some information about the Emerging Markets Case Studies Collection, or EMCS as it's well known. EMCS is part of Emerald's proprietary collection of cases products. It offers new perspectives on challenges in emerging and developing markets. Its scope is indexed. All accepted cases are fully double-blind peer-reviewed, and only cases of a high quality will be accepted to it. Cases from all business and management disciplines are welcomed. Every published case to EMCS receives £100, so even if you're not submitting to a competition, you are always in line for payment. That's when your case is accepted and published. We welcome cases at any point, so you don't need to wait for any competitions to launch to submit to. but you're all here for the CEEMAN competition, so that's obviously what you've got in mind. At Emerald, we are not just on the lookout for cases, but for reviewers too. Should you be interested in being a reviewer, please do let us know. It can often be a great way to understanding the process behind cases and sharpen your own skills in writing effective case studies and teaching notes. I've included links to the collection, including the virtual issue of last year's winning cases here. So do check these out, as these highlight the top cases from 2021 and reveal exactly what the judges are looking for cases in this year's competition. Next slide, please. So submitting to EMCS and the CEEMAN competition overall could not be easier. You'll need to log into the EMCS Scholar One submission site and select the option of CEEMAN 2022 ahead of sending your case to us. What will help you further will be adherence to our author guidelines, which are available on the main webpage for EMCS. Follow these to the letter and the process for approving your case becomes a lot easier. Do remember the key principles to a good case. They should have a developing and emerging markets focus, be based on a real situation in a real company with a clear decision-making situation, and ensure all necessary permissions have been cleared prior to submission. Testing your case in the classroom is always helpful too. Ensure that all of these are in place and your case has a much higher chance of being accepted. The CEEMAN competition does have a final deadline and it is not too far away. Please ensure that your submission is sent to us by the 17th of April 2022. On occasion, deadlines can be extended, however, there is no guarantee to this. So to avoid disappointment, please do submit your case to us no later than the date given here. The total prize fund for CEEMAN is €4,000 with €2,500 to the winner. There are cash prizes for the runners-up too, and combined with the £100 sterling that you receive for being published in EMCS, there are plenty of incentives for entering. And finally, I should draw your attention to the Emerald Cases Hub as well, which Michael touched upon at the end of his presentation. Emerald are proud to support their authors through the hub, which contains courses to help you write better cases. This was launched in 2020. It includes really useful e-learning resources on the case method. The first phase focuses on writing cases and includes videos and interactive guides on every stage of the case writing process. That's from thinking about writing a case to selecting a topic, right through to submission and revising a case based on reviewer feedback. We then added modules on how to teach using cases in the second phase, and most recently added a course on how to teach online with cases, as we understood faculty around the world were being required to move their cases online, often with very little time to prepare. All of the content on there has been developed with help from the editors of both our EMCS and TCJ case collections. So it's a great place to hear directly from our editors on what they're looking for. The closer you follow their recommendations, the more likely it is that your case will be accepted. So that's me. Thanks for your time here today, and we can now open the floor to any questions that people may have. Please also use the chat box if you don't fancy speaking out loud.
Right, hi, sorry, I'm just checking the questions that have come in here. So somebody's asked if Tiasha can post her email address again, and that's fine, I can pull that out of the slides, unless you want to drop it in the chat, Tiasha.
I don't think that I have access to chat, so I think that, Sarah, you will send the presentation to all the attendees and they will find my email there. Otherwise, it can be found on the CEEMAN website under the case writing competition, so very easy to find it.
That's fine, I'll make sure that's in the follow-up email then.
Thank you.
Someone else has asked, can I present a recently published case in EMCS in the competition? Did you get that?
So James, my understanding is not, right? I think if I recall the guidelines, just correct me here, is that it needs to be a case not under consideration, not published as yet, to be considered for the competition. James, am I right?
That's correct. Yes, has to be an original case. It can't be sort of retrospectively added in.
Okay. Okay. And someone else has asked, can they enter the competition more than once?
Yes, you can. Yes, that's absolutely fine. As long as the cases are different from each other, fully original, not published elsewhere, then you can enter as many times as you wish. In fact, that'd be great, because you'd have more chance of winning overall. So yeah, we do welcome more than one submission from one author.
Great. How many learning objectives would you expect to be included in a case?
Yeah, I think the typical guidance is between 3 to 5. And that's probably my answer on most questions I get asked is 3 to 5. 3 to 5 sounds like a good number. I think, what you want to be focused on is what's the right target audience for the case? How complex is the case? How rich is the case? And on that basis, what kind of learning outcomes make sense? So it's not really a paint by numbers. There's no one specific answer to that, but I would say that I see most cases, most great cases, having less rather than more. So 3 or 4 learning outcomes I would see is more typical than 5, 6, or 7 learning outcomes. And the reason is that it's about focus and depth. So sometimes I think authors want to try and do everything in a case, right? They're writing this case, they think this is the case of their life, and they're never going to write a better case. And they're trying to put everything into the case because, as we know, organizations and decisions are messy, and there are a whole bunch of different issues at play. The challenge, however, is that if you think about how a case is taught, on the whole, cases are taught within a class for a session as part of a curriculum or syllabus in order to achieve a specific outcome for that instructor in the class. And so as educational tools, that's typically how they're used, and that's what the instructors are looking for. So focus really helps. But the caveat, of course, of that is it's all messy. And we know that, decisions in business are not marketing decisions or sales decisions or finance decisions. They're business decisions, and they touch a number of areas. So there's going to be complexity, there's going to be messiness, but you want to try and focus in so that the case fits easily into a typical class, in a typical course, in a business school anywhere in the world. The one caveat I'd say to that is cases that you're trying to write as capstone cases. Cases where they are by design more interdisciplinary, where by design they are meant to be in a capstone course or a case that finishes off a program. Think about an executive development program, for example, at one of the great business schools connected to CEEMAN around the world, where in the last day of that executive program, executives might have to deal with some kind of integrative case that touches on a number of areas. Then I would say you might have more like 4 or 5 learning outcomes, and you might cover marketing strategy and finance in some integrated way in the case. But those are few and far between, and again, much harder to write that rich and complex a case in 8 or 9 pages at the most. But certainly, there are great cases like that, and that may be what's on your mind. So broad guidance, I would say 3 to 5 learning outcomes, but it's led by some of these issues that you have to think about as you develop your case.
Great. And I've just got one final question here. And they just asked, if I don't win, will my case still be published?
We certainly double-blind peer review all cases and consider them that are submitted to the competition. And it kind of happens in parallel. we have the judging process that looks at the cases separate to our editorial process. And then those cases, whether they win or not, are all double-blind, peer-reviewed, and considered for publication within EMCS. So my quick default answer would be yes. And so we're very keen to see those cases go through the process. As one would expect, award-winning cases almost sail through the review process because they've been absolutely fabulous and they've received good feedback from judges. And so it's a few tweaks and edits typically in order to make it more accessible to emerging market and developed economy instructors around the world. Cases that may not win may have a few more structural issues that need to be addressed. And that's typically where our editorial advisory board and our reviewers will be giving some good guidance to those authors over the weeks and months in 2022, hopefully for publication early in 2023.
That's great. I think that's all our questions. Just check the chat. Yep. Yep, no more questions there. So yeah, I just want to thank everybody who has attended the webinar today, and thank you very much to our speakers. That's fantastic. As I mentioned before, you'll receive an email within the next day with the recording of today's webinar. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with us if you have any follow-up questions using the details shared with you in the email. They'll be sent out again through the email. So that's everything. Thank you very much, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.